The world had folded itself into whiteness. Percival Tumbleseed trudged forward, his coat a fluttering scrap of color against the endless snow. The mountains rose like frozen cathedrals, their spires of ice and granite etched with the delicate geometry of frost. Wind moved between them in long, mournful sighs, as though the sky itself were remembering a song it could not quite finish. He left no footprints. The snow closed over them the instant he passed, polite in its forgetfulness. Above, the clouds hung low and immense, pressing close to the peaks as though seeking counsel. Their bellies were heavy with unfallen snow. Occasionally, a single flake would escape, slow, deliberate, almost apologetic, drifting past Percival's nose before vanishing into the mist. There were no paths here, only inclinations, the way the land leaned, the way the light dimmed slightly in one direction, the subtle magnetism of elsewhere. He followed those unseen cues, guided more by intuition than reason, which had long ago frozen somewhere behind him. The umbrella, closed and slung across his back, was crusted with a thin glaze of frost. It seemed almost asleep, dreaming of rain in a place that had never known it. Its handle glinted faintly, like a memory of warmth. He came to a ridge that overlooked an immense valley. It was filled not with snow, but with light, a slow, liquid radiance that pooled between the mountains, shifting through soft hues, blue, then violet, then green. The wind that rose from it carried a faint ringing sound, like distant bells underwater. The valley of light stretched far beyond the horizon. Its glow touched the undersides of the clouds, painting them with colors the sky had forgotten. Percival stood at its edge, entranced, his breath a pale cloud in the frigid air. The snow around him sparkled faintly, not from reflected sunlight, but from within. Tiny, living motes of luminescence drifted in the air, circling him like curious insects. Each flake seemed to hum a note too small for the ear to hold. He walked on. The descent was gentle at first, then treacherous. The slope fell away in long, sweeping curves, and the snow deepened until it rose to his knees. Beneath the surface, he could feel the slow pulse of the mountain, deep, ancient, almost sentient. Its rhythm was calm but vast, like the breathing of a creature too old to remember its own beginning. Here the air changed. It grew dense, crystalline, each inhalation sharp and cold enough to etch new thoughts into his mind. He could feel the quiet pressing against his skin, whispering softly in a language made of absence. At the base of the descent, he reached a frozen lake. Its surface was so clear that the sky seemed to continue beneath his feet, a perfect mirror of clouds and distance. He paused, uncertain where reflection ended and reality began. When he stepped forward, the ice sang beneath his boots, a low, resonant hum that echoed outward in concentric ripples of sound. The hum awakened the air. The mist around him began to coil and shift, forming vague outlines, towering shapes, translucent and spectral. They rose from the snow like the ghosts of the mountains themselves. Each one shimmered faintly, as if made from the memory of light. They did not move toward him. They merely existed, silent, solemn guardians of a world too quiet for mortals. Their presence filled the valley, vast and still. Percival felt no fear, only reverence. He bowed his head, and for a brief moment he thought he could hear their thoughts, long, slow, and patient, like glaciers turning over in their sleep. He crossed the lake carefully. Beneath the ice, shadows swam, not fish, but patterns, stories half written in frost. They coiled and drifted, rearranging themselves as if past, spelling shapes that dissolved before they could be read. On the far shore, the snow rose into a ridge of sculpted drifts, smooth as marble, curved like the folds of a sleeping giant's cloak. The wind there was gentler, carrying a faint scent that didn't belong, pine resin and something older, mineral, like the breath of time itself. Atop the ridge stood an archway, not built, but grown. Ice had fused and twisted into delicate spires, woven with filigrees of frost so fine they seemed spun from glass. The arch glowed faintly with inner light, as though moonlight had taken root there. Percival approached. Beneath the arch the snow was untouched, perfect, a threshold waiting for meaning. He brushed a gloved hand along the ice and felt a vibration travel up his arm, a soft, resonant tone that harmonized with the mountain's pulse. The air shimmered. For an instant, he saw something within the arch, a glimpse of another landscape, a vast plain of snow under black stars, where rivers of light ran like molten glass. Then the image faded. He understood somehow that the arch was a listening place, the mountain, vast and dreaming, heard through it. Perhaps it was listening now. Percival stood before it, uncertain what to offer. Words seemed too heavy for the air here, too clumsy for the silence. So instead, he simply breathed, slow, deliberate, letting his heartbeat fall into rhythm with the mountains. After a time, he bowed, a gesture of respect, and continued onward. The slope beyond the arch rose steeply. He climbed, the snow deepening again until it seemed the world itself was trying to cradle him in its pale arms. The wind grew quieter, as though unwilling to disturb the communion of ice and thought. Above, the stars began to appear, not in the sky, but in the snow itself. Tiny points of light bloomed beneath his feet, glowing faintly through the drifts. Each step awakened more, until the entire slope shimmered like a galaxy hidden beneath glass. By the time he reached the crest, the world behind him had vanished into mist. Ahead lay only more whiteness, rolling and endless. But in that whiteness, he sensed patterns, not shapes exactly, but suggestions. The curve of a sleeping face in the snow, the outline of a wing, the echo of laughter frozen in the wind. And at the very center of it all, rising like a thought that refused to fade, stood the next peak, taller than the rest, its summit wrapped in cloud and shadow. From its crown streamed a faint, golden light, soft as dawn seen through memory. Percival smiled to himself. "Ah," he murmured, voice barely a breath. "There you are." He began to climb. The climb began as effort and became meditation. Each step upward erased another trace of the world below. The snow thinned to a fine dust of frost that swirled like breath. The air sharpened into glass. His coat crackled faintly with frozen light, and his thoughts slowed until they matched the rhythm of the mountain. Long, deliberate, unhurried. The sky above was not sky, but vapor, dense and luminous. A soft glow emanated from it, a colorless brightness that made shadows meaningless. The wind no longer howled, it whispered. Its words were indistinct, as if it spoke only in tone, the language of hush and waiting. He passed through corridors of stone and snow, where the mountain had folded in upon itself. Ice crystals clung to the walls in fractal blooms, each one a cathedral in miniature. When he exhaled, his breath crystallized instantly and joined the architecture of frost, becoming part of the mountain's slow, glittering dream. As he ascended, the landscape began to shift subtly. The slopes grew smoother, the rock more sculpted, as though unseen hands had carved the very bones of the peak. Ridges formed patterns, spirals, lattices, deliberate symmetry emerging from natural chaos. He realized slowly that he was no longer walking through wilderness. He was walking through memory. Snow concealed most of it, but faint outlines remained. An arch here, a corridor there, the remnants of a structure so vast that the mountain itself seemed to have grown around it. He brushed away frost from a wall and found carvings, spirals of script unlike any he had seen, their edges rounded by centuries of cold. The air carried a faint vibration now, a low resonance that came not from wind or stone, but from presence. It was not sound so much as awareness, the mountain watching itself through him. He crested a final rise and stopped. Before him stood a monastery, if monastery was even the right word. It seemed grown rather than built, its towers formed from living ice that pulsed faintly like the veins of some immense, frozen being. Arches of translucent stone reached upward and outward, catching the pale light and bending it into ribbons of blue and silver. Between them hung banners of frost, rippling slowly despite the stillness of the air. No doors, no gates, only open thresholds. The mountain did not keep secrets. It merely waited for those willing to listen. Percival stepped through one such archway, and silence deepened around him until it felt physical, pressing gently against his skin. Inside, vast halls opened one into another, each filled with drifting flakes that never seemed to settle. Pillars of frozen quartz rose like trees, their surfaces etched with flowing runes that glowed faintly when he passed. The floor was glassy and smooth, reflecting the distant light like a frozen sea. He walked slowly, careful not to disturb the equilibrium of the place. Even his footsteps made no sound, the snow absorbing every trace of his passage. Along one wall stood what appeared to be altars, low slabs of polished ice, upon which rested bowls filled with faintly glowing snow. Each emitted a different hue: green, blue, violet, gold. They pulsed gently, irregularly, as if breathing. He paused before one of them, feeling warmth emanate through his gloves. The snow inside was golden, flecked with tiny motes of darker color that moved of their own accord. When he leaned close, he saw within it not light, but memory. Distant sunlight glinting off water, wind rippling through a field, the hush before rain. The bowl was full of preserved silence, moments of stillness gathered and frozen. He moved on. Farther within the monastery, the architecture changed. The walls became sheer ice, perfectly transparent, revealing vast cavities beyond filled with drifting luminescence. Shapes floated there, not alive, but aware. Frozen gestures of light, suspended mid-motion, like prayers that had crystallized before reaching their destination. The roof above arched high into shadow, where massive icicles hung like organs of a frozen cathedral. From time to time, they resonated, faint tones of glass and wind that filled the halls with a slow, harmonic sigh. The sound was so soft it could barely be heard, yet so deep it seemed to echo within his bones. He came to a spiral staircase carved entirely from ice. Its steps glowed faintly underfoot, each one singing a note as he pressed his weight upon it, ascending into melody. The higher he climbed, the more the air shimmered, until it seemed he was walking through frozen music. At the top lay a circular chamber open to the sky, or what passed for it. The ceiling was gone, replaced by a dome of mist and light. Snowflakes fell upward here, drifting lazily into the void. In the center of the room stood a great frozen wheel, carved with symbols that turned ever so slightly of their own accord. It was a clock, but one that measured silence instead of time. Each rotation of its spokes released a faint glimmer that drifted into the air and vanished. The rhythm was slow, steady, ancient, the heartbeat of stillness itself. Percival stood before it, awed. His reflection wavered in the ice, multiplied 100-fold, each version of him pausing in unison. For a moment, he felt the weight of all those mirrored selves. Every step he had taken, every world he had crossed, gathered here at the quiet summit of the earth. He exhaled softly, and his breath curled through the air like smoke, touching the wheel. The frozen spokes trembled, then began to turn faster, releasing threads of light that rose toward the open dome. The threads drifted upward, weaving themselves into constellations, faint and trembling. The snow above caught the glow and scattered it, so that for a brief, impossible moment, stars fell upward into the mist. Then, slowly, the motion ceased. The wheel slowed to stillness again, as though content with the offering of a single breath. Percival stepped back. The air was different now, lighter, awake. The monastery seemed to hum faintly, as though the silence itself had been tuned anew. He turned to leave, but at the threshold he looked back once more. The wheel gleamed faintly in the half-light, and for just a heartbeat he thought he saw movement, not mechanical, but living. The suggestion of an eye opening deep within the ice. Then it was gone. Outside, the storm had begun. Snow whirled around the monastery in vast spirals, drawn toward the peaks. The wind was no longer still but purposeful, shaping itself into forms and eddies that pulsed with strange energy. The entire range seemed to awaken, not in violence, but in thought. As he descended the steps, the world below flickered with light. The valley of snow shimmered faintly, as though a great pulse had traveled through the spine of the mountain and into the earth beyond. Percival reached the base and looked back. The monastery's towers glowed softly, every line of ice lit from within, their reflections blending with the snow. The sky above split briefly, revealing a streak of pale aurora that bent downward like a bow. For the first time in days, or weeks, or centuries, time had ceased to measure itself. He smiled. The world, vast and unknowable, was listening again. And somewhere far above the storm, where the thin air hummed with invisible light, the snow began to fall upward once more. The wind no longer wept, it sang. High above the monastery, the peaks converged into spires that shimmered with their own light. They rose through bands of mist that glowed faintly blue, as if moonlight had been trapped there for centuries. The air grew so thin that sound itself became crystalline, each breath a brittle echo of existence. Percival's boots crunched faintly on the snow, not a heavy sound, but precise, like footsteps across glass. Each one lingered in the air, a heartbeat longer than it should, reluctant to fade. The slope steepened, and his umbrella, once slung lazily over his shoulder, now served as both staff and companion. "Do you ever tire of climbing?" it asked at last, its voice muffled beneath frost. "Not climbing," Percival murmured, "but not knowing what waits above. You might consider someday a hobby that involves level ground." "Someday," he agreed, "but not today." The ascent grew strange. The air shimmered with vertical bands of light that pulsed like veins. When he passed between them, the temperature shifted abruptly, now warmth, now cold, now something that felt like memory pressed against the skin. The bands hummed faintly, and the snow within them glowed from underneath, revealing vast geometric shadows deep below the surface. He realized with a chill of wonder that the mountain was hollow. Somewhere beneath the drifts and the silence, an immense lattice of light and stone pulsed faintly, as though the entire range were one living organ. Each heartbeat sent a ripple through the snow, a soft sigh that could almost be mistaken for music. "Umbrella," he whispered. "I think the mountain is awake." "Then let's be polite," it said. "Step quietly. You're walking on someone's dreams." The path narrowed to a ledge where the snow had thinned to a mere breath of white over the bare ice. The cliff face beside him glittered with trapped stars, flecks of light frozen mid-fall, each one trembling faintly, as if impatient for release. When he brushed the surface, one of the stars broke free, spiraling upward like a tiny comet before vanishing into the air. It left behind a faint ringing tone that lingered, multiplying softly until the whole ledge vibrated with sound. Percival stopped. The tone built upon itself, harmonizing, deepening, until the air around him resonated like a vast, unseen choir. He looked upward. Above, hanging in the mist, were shapes, delicate, translucent, and immense. They drifted slowly between the peaks, figures made of pure resonance, bodies formed from the vibration of frozen air. They shimmered as they moved, their outlines bending and collapsing like reflections in disturbed water. The choir of ice. Each of them sang without mouth or breath, their song a convergence of temperature and vibration. The music moved through him, not around him, a living current that carried images instead of words. He saw in flashes, storms folding into stillness, glaciers dreaming of rivers, wind sculpting mountains into memory. He closed his eyes and let the song fill him. The umbrella, for once, said nothing. Then a single voice, detached from the rest, clearer, nearer. When he opened his eyes, one of the figures had descended. It was enormous, yet weightless, its body composed of swirling snow and refracted light. Where its face should have been, a cluster of tiny frozen suns burned softly. "Traveler," it said, though the voice was not heard but felt, resonating through his bones. "You walk the bones of memory." Percival bowed slightly. "I seem to make a habit of that." "You woke the still wind below," the figure continued. "The monastery sings again. Why have you come further? There is nothing above but silence too wide for thought." "I wanted to see it," he said simply. The being tilted, considering. To see silence is to risk vanishing into it. He smiled faintly. "That's happened before." "I tend to find my way back," the choir's voice shimmered, half laughter, half sorrow. "Few return unchanged." "I'd be disappointed if I didn't," he said. The air trembled. The being extended one long, translucent limb and touched the ground before him. Ice blossomed outward from the point of contact, fractal patterns spiraling into shapes that resembled wings or perhaps roots. "Then carry this with you," it said. "A map not of where you go, but of where you have already been." The pattern solidified, a delicate sheet of frozen lace that pulsed faintly with light. When he lifted it, it was weightless, humming softly like the echo of a lullaby. He tucked it into his coat. "Thank you." "Do not thank us," said the choir. "We are only the mountain remembering itself aloud." And then, as silently as mist dispersing, the figures dissolved. Their song lingered a moment longer, then faded into the soundless glow of the high peaks. Percival stood alone again. The trail turned upward once more. the world narrowed to whiteness and pulse. He passed through archways sculpted by wind, immense ribs of stone and frost that hummed faintly when the air moved through them. Within each arch shimmered fragments of reflection, faces, places, moments, the ghost images of all who had climbed before. He paused beneath one, touching the ice. For a heartbeat, he saw himself, not as he was, but as a flicker of light traveling upward through endless white. Then the image faded, leaving only frost and sky. "Umbrella," he murmured. "Do you ever wonder if the mountain remembers everyone who's touched it?" "I prefer not to think about such things," it said, "especially when standing on ledges." "Understandable," he replied. The ascent steepened. Snow turned to ice, then to hard, glassy crystal that rang beneath his steps. The air itself began to shimmer, turning visible, faint waves of distortion that rippled through space like transparent fabric. He could see the cold now, luminous, alive, moving through the air like water. At times it brushed against his skin, not biting but electric, as though tasting him for memory. The light changed again. What had been white became faintly violet, then blue, then a shade of silver so pale it could barely be named. The shadows grew softer, dissolving into the light rather than opposing it. Perspective itself blurred. Near and far became indistinguishable, and he found himself walking through distance without moving. The mountain was teaching him its logic. Then, at last, he reached the crest. The summit was not what he expected. There was no pinnacle, no single peak to conquer. Instead, the mountain spread into a broad plateau, a plain of ice so smooth it reflected the world above like an enormous mirror. The sky here was perfectly still, a dome of pale luminescence without sun or moon. And at the center of the plain stood a single stone, smooth, round, unassuming, and faintly warm. He approached it, crouched, and touched the surface. It thrummed under his fingertips, a soft, rhythmic vibration, like the faintest heartbeat. The umbrella tilted its head. "That's alive, isn't it?" "I think so. Should we be worried?" "Probably." The vibration deepened, and a crack of light appeared across the stone surface. Slowly, it widened, not breaking, but opening. Inside, light churned like liquid, swirling with impossible colors. He leaned closer, and for a moment, the reflection of his face wavered and changed, replaced by visions of snowfields, skies, and memories of warmth he couldn't quite place. Then the light spoke, softly, like snow melting in reverse. "Climber of echoes." The voice was ancient but tender. "You have come farther than most. The mountain remembers you." Percival bowed his head. "And I will remember it. Then take what it gives freely. The stillness between storms, the pause between breaths." The light pulsed once more, then dimmed. The crack closed, and the stone became inert again. Only now, the air above it shimmered faintly, as if warmed by invisible dawn. Percival stood in the center of the plateau and breathed. The silence that followed was total, but not empty. It was the silence of completion, of a note that has found its resting place. When he finally turned to descend, the mountain didn't resist. The snow softened under his steps. The wind quieted, and for the first time, the peaks seemed to smile. The descent didn't begin at once. It began upward. For as Percival turned from the warm stone and its dimming pulse, the plateau trembled, not with violence, but with revelation. The mirrored surface of the ice rippled like water touched by breath, and a single column of light rose from its heart, spiraling upward into the colorless sky. The air thickened with stillness. Then, without quite knowing how, he stepped into the light. It accepted him, not as a solid body, but as a note returning to its melody. For a moment, he were falling upward through brightness that had no source. The world stretched thin. Sound, form, memory all became transparent. His heart beat slowly, not as rhythm but as echo. He thought he heard the faint hum of the wheel from the monastery below, turning once more in answer. Then the light dissolved, and he found himself standing on a narrow ridge of ice suspended in air. The peaks below were gone, hidden beneath cloud. Above him towered the last summit, a needle of translucent crystal rising into a sky that no longer looked like sky at all, but the underside of a frozen sea. The wind here did not blow. It hovered, waiting for permission to exist. He looked behind. His footprints vanished even as he made them. "Umbrella," he whispered. "We're very high." "I can tell," it said faintly. "Everything feels thinner up here, even the thoughts." "Do you ever wonder," he murmured, "if the air remembers what it used to hold? I wonder if we'll remember how to breathe once we're done." They continued in silence. The ridge curved inward toward the crystal spire. The closer he came, the more the world changed. Snow ceased to be snow. It became light, pretending to be solid. Each flake shimmered before dissolving into vapor. The ground below glowed softly, threads of illumination running through the ice like veins of frozen lightning. He reached the base of the spire and placed a gloved hand against it. It was smooth and impossibly warm, pulsing gently. Alive, like the stone before, but far older, deeper. He pressed his ear to it. He heard voices, not speaking, singing. Countless tones layered in vast, slow chords, a language made entirely of resonance. It was not the choir of ice from before. It was something vaster, something that existed before the mountain learned to rise. He closed his eyes and listened. The song was not about time or space, but about shape, the curvature of quiet, the symmetry of waiting, the still geometry of thought. Every note carved another line in the frozen air. Then a single thread of the melody separated itself, one voice calling out through the harmony. "Traveler." The word sounded like wind touching glass. "I'm here," he answered. The voice shivered. "You stand at the edge of the crown. Few have seen it. Fewer still have looked away. Then I won't look away. You will not have the choice." The air trembled. The crystal spire began to glow from within, light spreading upward through its core until it reached the tip. A point so sharp it seemed to pierce through the idea of color itself. The sky cracked open. From the fissure poured not storm but light given motion. It streamed downward in ribbons, twisting around the spire, painting the air with slow, deliberate shapes. Each line of brilliance curved into another, forming constellations that shimmered, then folded inward like petals of a great unseen flower. Percival shielded his eyes. Though the light did not burn, it soothed. Within the illumination, shadows flickered. Shapes of things half-remembered, trees whispering in a green wood, reflections in still water, the sound of distant rain. All the worlds he had walked seemed to exist here simultaneously, coiling through the brightness like memories refusing to fade. He felt the umbrella quiver at his side. "Percival," it said softly, "I think this is where the mountain ends." "Or begins." "Both, probably. It has that sort of personality." The light descended, slow and graceful. It reached him not as brilliance but as warmth, a soft pressure against his skin, like an exhale from something immense. His thoughts blurred. For an instant, he could not tell where he ended and the mountain began. He saw the monastery below, shining faintly through the clouds. He saw the choir drifting in endless loops between the peaks. He saw every flake of snow as a memory of something once alive, each one a note, frozen in place, waiting for its turn to fall. And then he saw beyond. A sea of brightness stretched outward in all directions. Not sky, not void, but an expanse of pure potential. Shapes stirred within it. Half-formed dreams, unspoken thoughts, futures undecided. The mountain, he realized, was not a place at all, but the visible tip of something vaster. The echo of a thought dreaming itself solid. He took a step forward, and the ground responded with music. The spire resonated, a clear tone rippling through the light. It was invitation and warning both. "Umbrella," he said softly, "I think this is where the world forgets itself." "Then perhaps," said the umbrella, "it's best we remember for it." The light around him shifted, turning from white to gold, from gold to a color he could not name. It moved through him, erasing weight, cold, even the idea of distance. He felt, for one fleeting instant, perfectly still, the kind of stillness that contains every possible motion. And then, as gently as snowfall, the vision folded. The spire dimmed, the sky softened, the wind returned, whispering faintly through the frozen air. Percival stood once more upon the ridge. The mountain stretched quiet and infinite below him. He looked down at his gloved hands, frost melting into steam, and exhaled. The umbrella leaned lightly against his shoulder. "Are we done, then?" "Never quite done," he said, but perhaps paused. "That sounds restful." "It is." He turned back toward the descending path. The peaks shimmered faintly, like fading stars. The monastery's glow pulsed far below, rhythmic, alive. Beyond it stretched the endless snowscape, luminous and empty, waiting for another story to cross its surface. As he began to descend, snowflakes began to fall upward again, slow, deliberate, like thoughts returning home. The sky, pale and endless, breathed once, a long exhale that stirred the clouds into motion, and whispered something only the wind could hear. And Percival Tumbleseed walked on,